They say you can't trust the weather, that no forecast is ever truly certain, not even with satellites spinning overhead, not even with billion-dollar algorithms processing the storms of tomorrow. But once, long before we outsourced our Sky 2 machines, there were people who could see the secrets written in the clouds, the frost, the animals, the restless air itself, men and women who trusted not a screen but the living signs all around them. Picture a medieval farmer, calloused hands and weary eyes, standing at the edge of his field as dawn breaks over a thatched village half swallowed by morning mist. He has no clock, no phone, no radar, yet he knows, almost to the hour, when the rain will come. To him, the sky is not a backdrop. It is a manuscript written by unseen hands. He reads it as you might read a letter from a lost friend, scanning every shape and color for the truth it hides. He knows that when high clouds drift west, but the wind at ground level leans east, the world is caught in a quiet argument, the ancient push and pull that births storms. He knows the sound of a distant bell, carried far beyond its usual range, means the air is heavy with moisture, that a storm's hand is already brushing the edges of the village. This knowledge, half folklore, half empirical science, was never written in official books. It lived in memories, passed from mouth to mouth like a hush of forbidden wisdom. If you'd stood beside him, centuries ago, you'd see him turn his face to a sunrise the color of blood, not just a beautiful dawn but a warning. A red sky at morning, a scarlet gash across the horizon, means dust and storms are pushing in from the west, carried by winds that never show their face. He would whisper an old line to himself. Red in the morning, shepherd's warning. Red at night, shepherd's delight. Not superstition but a simple code for the ancient dance of sun and dust and wind, confirmed not by faith but by years of watching, waiting, remembering. The modern mind, spoon-fed by apps and forecasts, might scoff at these signs, dismiss them as rural poetry, quaint and primitive. Yet if you dig deeper, you'll find modern science has spent centuries rediscovering what these ancestors already knew. Layers of knowledge, real, measurable, peer-reviewed, hidden under the soil of folklore. Studies show that when clouds cross paths at different heights, when warm south winds collide with the cold breath of the north, the probability of rain spikes exactly as those farmers claimed. But the medieval farmer didn't stop with the sky. He turned to the restless world at his feet, the animals who shared his roof and his fields, whose senses stretch beyond our dulled perception. His cows, for instance, were more than just beasts of burden. He watched when they lay down unexpectedly in open fields, a strange stillness before the storm. He knew their great lungs and bones could feel the air pressure drop, the same way a sailor feels the deep tug of a wave before it breaks. Modern research, the kind you find buried in agricultural journals, never in primetime news, shows that cows indeed change their posture hours before rainfall, as reliable in some cases as the local weather station. Then there were the swallows, those aerial acrobats that flitted above the hedgerows like tiny prophets. When the insects they hunted flew lower, the swallows followed, swooping close to the ground in sudden, urgent spirals. To a medieval farmer, this meant one thing, rain, and if the swallows stayed high, the sky would hold. Science has since traced this to the density of humid air, which pushes insects lower, a natural Doppler radar, hidden in the beating wings of birds. Even the dogs and cats, those humble companions scratching at the cottage door, played their part. The dog that rolled in the dirt again and again, not from fleas, but from an ache deep in its joints, a sign the air was shifting. The cat, sudden and theatrical, washing its ears as though cleansing itself for the downpour to come. They were not cute anecdotes but living barometers, their nervous systems tuned to the pressure fluctuations we ignore. But if the animals were the secret code, the plants were the ciphers. The pine cone, that humble seed-bearer scattered in forest and hedgerow, would close its scales tight when the air thickened with moisture. It did not care for the science of humidity, only for the survival of its seeds. Yet the farmer knew, when the cone snapped shut, it was time to hurry the hay under cover. The poplar trees too, turning their leaves like pages in a hidden book. When the silver undersides of their leaves flashed skyward, a storm was already being written beyond the hills. These signs weren't myths, they were observations, tested by centuries of harvests, failed crops, and winter hungers that left no room for romantic error. They were pieces of a puzzle that has been slowly buried under concrete, power lines, and the belief that our devices have made us immune to the whims of nature. But the truth is, these old signs still speak, if you know how to listen. Not all signals were visible. Some were felt only through the skin, the breath, the subtle shift in the taste of the wind. Medieval farmers spoke of the smell of rain before it fell, that sharp, metallic scent that we now know is the release of jasmine, a compound born from soil bacteria when touched by rising moisture. They called it the herald of the clouds, an invisible messenger that told them to gather grain, shelter animals, and brace for the heavens to open. They even understood that each rain carried its own signature scent. A warm spring drizzle did not smell like an autumn downpour. A sudden summer storm had its own weight on the nose, a promise of water or ruin, depending on what stood in the fields. Sometimes, the smell of flowers grew sweeter on days when storms stayed away, the blossoms releasing their fragrance more freely when the air was stable and dry. Modern lab studies confirm this. Plants release volatile oils more abundantly when the barometer holds steady, when no rain threatens to wash their pollen to the mud. And there, beneath the shadows of oaks and ash, they would find signs not just for the coming hours, but for the whole season to come. If the oak leafed out before the ash, they believed, the summer would be soaked in rain, a pattern that, astonishingly, modern botanists have found carries a grain of truth. Trees sense subtle shifts in temperature and light, adjusting their growth in ways that speak of the weather weeks or even months ahead. And so the medieval farmer, armed with nothing but his eyes, ears, and instincts sharpened by need, do what we now attempt with satellites and storm chasers. He could read the hidden language of a living world, a language older than words. But in the end, it wasn't just about crops or shelter. This ancient weather lore was more than a survival guide. It was a testament to how deeply our ancestors understood the contract they had with nature, one built on observation, reverence, and fear. When the church bells tolled and their sound carried miles farther than they should, the villagers knew to look to the sky with dread. The same wind that scattered their prayers could scatter their crops, drown their cattle, or strip their orchards bare. Somewhere between those distant bells and the blood-red dawn, we buried this, knowing, traded it for screens and synthetic forecasts, for the comforting illusion that our technology makes us immune. But the truth is still there, whispering through the restless animals, the restless air, the flicker of clouds that once spoke in a language we've forgotten how to hear. Imagine now a single frog croaking at the edge of a marsh, a sound so ordinary we rarely pause to listen. But to the medieval villager lying awake in the darkness of a thatched cottage, that chorus was as vital as any church bell. Some villagers trusted their amphibian forecasters so deeply that they would listen for the swelling song of the frogs, instead of the toll of iron bells to warn them that rain was about to sweep across their fields. The truth hidden beneath this practice is stranger than it seems. Science would one day confirm that frogs possess skin so sensitive they can detect shifts in barometric pressure more finely than many modern instruments. A drop as tiny as 0.1 millibars is enough to awaken a chorus that might keep an entire village from sleep, but also keep them alive. Because for the farmer who has grain to harvest or livestock to move, knowing a storm is brewing even half a day early can be the line between survival and ruin. In the muddy diary of a grumbling farmer from 1467, you find a single line of irritation. These cursed frogs, they do scream the whole night through, and yet in the morn the clouds break open as they promised. The man may have cursed their chorus, but buried in that line is a truth modern meteorology didn't prove until centuries later. These creatures are living sensors. Their croaks are primitive but astonishingly precise weather alarm. And the frogs were not alone. In the waters of the village pond, fish told their own version of tomorrow's tale. Imagine an entire school of fish suddenly leaping and splashing on a still summer afternoon. It looks like chaos, but to the keen eye, it is a sign of deep pressure shifting far above the clouds. Before storms, air pressure drops and the fish's swim bladders expand, causing discomfort that drives them to break the surface in desperate leaps. Medieval fishing communities turned this into a code. When the fish jump high, the winds howl soon after. Modern studies back this ancient knowing. Some species can sense pressure changes, though subtle that they effectively predict storms 2 days before our radar spots them. It's easy to scoff at these signals now, when our homes are sealed boxes and we've paved over the marshes. But once, the walls of a peasant's cottage were thin enough for the croak of frogs and the splash of startled fish to be heard in. The night warnings and reassurances, layered over the whisper of wind under the thatch. Step from the pond to the hedgerow where crickets serenade the dusk. To the medieval mind, the cricket was more than just a summer lullaby. It was a tiny, living thermometer. The warmer the night, the faster the crickets chirp. A fact so true that centuries later, entomologists would turn it into an actual formula. Count the chirps for 15 seconds, add 37, and you have the temperature in Fahrenheit. accurate enough to rival the glass thermometers that wouldn't exist for hundreds of years. Picture a farmer's child curled up in straw, counting those soft chirps in the dark, reciting them like an ancient code against the cold that waited. Beyond the door, and in the silent corners of the barn, another creature spun its own prophecies. The spider. When the air was clear and calm, the spider's web was strong and short, stretched skillfully across doorframes and fence posts, a sign of settled weather. But when storms approached, the spider would lengthen the web's support threads, as if bracing for the winds that would tear it down. Sometimes it would abandon its work entirely, a tiny engineer surrendering to the whims of the coming gale. One ancient text notes, "The spider works badly before rain but skillfully in fair weather." Modern research, hidden in footnotes and the back pages of journals, reveals why the hairs on a spider's legs can sense minute changes in atmospheric pressure, as delicate as the brush of a lover's breath. Beneath the soil, even the worms told their story. When the ground swarmed with sudden wriggling exoduses, a mass of earthworms surfacing overnight, the village knew rain was imminent. Worms flee rising moisture to avoid drowning in their tunnels, their flight an unintentional message to the world above. Medieval farmers called it the worm exodus, a sign so trusted that it was carved into folk rhymes and passed on through the generations like a secret inheritance. And higher still, the dragonfly patrolled the village pond like a living weather vane. When they flew high above the water, their shimmering wings catching the light, fair skies were certain. But when they skimmed low, dancing inches above the surface, rain was close. This was no superstition, only the chase. Dragonflies hunt insects whose flight height changes with the pressure, so they too become barometers on the wing, reading the hidden tremors in the air. Some signs were so subtle you could mistake them for chance. The sudden clustering of house on walls, the restless shifting of their tiny bodies, meant moisture was thickening the air, pressing them closer together as a storm gathered its breath. In alpine villages, distant sounds, a barking dog, a creaking wheel would travel farther, clearer when humidity arose before rain. The church bells that hung heavy in the stone towers were not only a call to prayer, but an instrument that spoke in echoes of the coming weather. When the bells' voices carried twice as far, the villagers would gather their flocks, shutter their homes, and whisper the old prayers. And when winter's frost crept back to reclaim the fields, another layer of secret knowledge revealed itself. Medieval farmers were not blind to the bite of the cold. They watched it with the patience of monks deciphering an ancient text. Early frost was an omen of a long, bitter winter, the kind that could empty larders and silence entire villages. A frost that clung in delicate, crystal filigree. Hoarfrost spoke of a dry, stable cold if the sky stayed clear. But if that frost melted too quickly under clouded skies, it signaled a lurking storm ready to devour the stores and test the faith of the strongest hearts. One farming diary from 1389 records more than 50 types of frost, each with its own name, its own whisper of what was to come. Some frost clung only to the north side of a stone wall, a sign that a different kind of winter lay ahead than when the ice favored the south. They read these patterns as one might read the stars, or the folds of an ancient manuscript passed down in secret. Even dew, so gentle it seems insignificant, held its place in this arcane meteorology. Heavy morning dew told of calm skies, stable air, no storm to scatter seed or soak hayricks. Its presence meant the ground cooled evenly overnight, a delicate balance of temperature and humidity that these farmers knew in their bones. Their entire survival was an act of listening, a patient, devoted conversation with the living world. If the frost came early, they shifted the harvest. If the hoarfrost thickened, they braced for endless cold nights. The ice that formed on ponds and streams clear, thick sheets told of steady cold, while cloudy, brittle ice spoke of shifting winds and erratic weather that could ruin a season's plans. They walked the edges of frozen ponds like priests reading sacred script, interpreting cracks and ripples as messages meant only for those who knew how to hear. But perhaps the most ethereal of all their signs was the moon, that pale sentinel drifting through black winter skies. A moon that burned bright and clear meant plunging temperatures by dawn, and so farmers rose in the dark to protect seedlings, to stoke fires that might otherwise die under the coming frost's breath. A hazy moon, dim and shrouded in a ghostly halo, was the herald of moisture, a rain that could arrive within days. Some called it superstition, yet modern atmospheric studies now find subtle lunar influences on tides, pressure, and cloud cover, tiny shifts that the ancients recognized, not as myth but as the hidden hand moving across their fields and forests. They mapped entire calendars to the moon's phases, knowing that certain nights, when the moon tilted just so, could mean fair winds for the coming harvest or a sudden storm to crush the grain. In these cold nights under the shifting moon, the church bells tolled again, not just for vespers or mass, but to carry the voices of wind and rain across rooftops and hedgerow. When the bell's peal sounded wrong, stretched thin and far by a storm's humid breath, it was the land itself, whispering its secrets to any who cared enough to listen. It is said, we have grown wiser, that our satellites and sensors have freed us from these primitive portents. But walk through a village where the frogs still sing, where the crickets still count the warmth, where the ice still sketches delicate prophecies on the pond, and you might feel that ancient knowing stir in your bones again. A knowing that what we dismiss as folklore was never truly lost. It only waits, just beneath the noise, for the silence that lets us hear the world speak in a language older than any book. Stand now on the frozen edge of a medieval field, frost biting at the ragged hems of your woolen cloak, the breath of cattle steaming in the dawn. Around you an entire world speaks in signs that most no longer hear. But to the farmers who lived and died by the tilt of the moon and the chorus of frogs, every drift of snow, every ringing bell, every rustle in the hedgerow was a coded message from the living earth. Imagine an old man in the year 1402, bent over a hand-bound journal by the dim flicker of tallow light. His fingers trace not letters, but the delicate frost patterns creeping up the inside of his cottage window. He notes how the crystals branch and feather, whether they cling thick or lie sparse, whether the moon glows bright above them or hides behind a gauze of clouds. This frost is his oracle, more trusted than any priest, more honest than any tax collector, because its language is written in ice, impossible to counterfeit. Outside, the church bell peals once, twice. It rolls across the fields like a whisper from the storm that coils just beyond the horizon, and the villagers know without charts or radars or apps that rain is already on the wind. In some alpine villages, the sound of those bells was tracked with a precision that would baffle modern minds. They listened not only to how far the sound carried, but to its tone, its resonance, its tremble against stone walls. It was a sonic barometer, a fragile yet reliable measure of the shifting sky. But these bells were only part of an intricate, living network. Imagine standing in a meadow and hearing something uncanny, the distant river's current louder than usual, the bark of a farm dog echoing from miles away, carried on air thickening with unseen moisture. It was not superstition, it was observation, repeated across generations until the subtle became undeniable fact. And while the bells tolled and the river whispered, the moon climbed higher, weaving her own cryptic stories. The medieval farmers did not simply gaze at her beauty, they tracked her phases, her brilliance, the mist that sometimes draped across her face. A moon so luminous it seemed unnatural warned of plunging temperatures by dawn. A dull haloed moon foretold storms soon to come. There were no telescopes, no scientific treatises explaining tides and gravitational pulls. There was only the patient watching of night after night, year after year, until a pattern emerged as clear to them as any printed forecast is to us. Some scoff at these lunar omens now, dismissing them as quaint folktales, but in the footnotes of modern meteorological journals, buried where few ever look, you find traces of validation. Subtle lunar gravity can influence tides, can tug gently at the atmosphere, can shift pressure just enough to bend the weather. The ancients could not name the forces, but they felt them in the frost that came early, in the wind that rattled shutters on a night when the moon hid behind a veil of cloud. Yet even with frogs, crickets, worms, dragonflies, spiders, and the frost itself whispering their secrets, the most haunting truth of all might be this: the people of those centuries did not believe they were guessing. They believed they were listening to a language encoded in the marrow of the world. To them, nature was not a passive backdrop, but an intelligent partner in a dialogue of survival. And when the dialogue broke, when a sign was ignored, when the frost's warning was misread, the penalty was famine, sickness, the slow gnawing hunger of a winter for which they had not prepared. If you walk these old paths now, where the forests have thinned and the marshes have been drained, you can almost hear the echoes, a sudden hush of crickets that might once have made a farmer glance nervously at the horizon, the raucous croak of frogs in a roadside ditch that might have sent a village scurrying to bring in drying grain, the silvery gleam of hoarfrost on a split rail fence, a message overlooked by a world too busy to kneel close and read the icy script. We have not truly forgotten these signs. They linger in fragments, old proverbs we have remember, folk rhymes carved into the margins of parish ledgers. The distant stories whispered by elders who once heard them from grandparents long buried under stone. They survive in the uneasy chill you feel when the wind shifts just before a storm, that primal twinge that makes you pull your coat tighter, though your phone says there's no rain due. Modern science, so quick to dismiss the old ways, circles back to them again and again. Studies confirm the frog's pressure sense, the fish that leap before storms, the spider's delicate hairs tuned to the air's subtle breath. They prove what the medieval farmers always knew, that the world does not fall silent when we look away. It goes on speaking, whispering, warning, promising. It begs a deeper question, unsettling yet strangely liberating. What else might still be hidden, coded in the swirl of frost or the echo of a bell across the hills? How much ancient intelligence have we buried beneath the concrete certainty of our instruments, our screens, our constant hunger for explanations that can be measured but never felt? Perhaps these secrets were never meant to be hoarded in weather apps or locked in glass thermometers. Perhaps they were always meant to be lived, to be read in the restless leap of a fish, the hurried exodus of worms from the sodden earth, the hush that falls on the hedgerow when the crickets fall silent, and the sky grows heavy with unshed rain. Step back from the rush and the noise for a moment. Stand barefoot on the old soil. Listen to the frog in the ditch, the hum of crickets in the hedgerow, the gentle clink of ice forming at the pond's edge. Feel how the air thickens before the storm, how the frost glows faintly blue beneath the moon, how the distant toll of an ancient bell might still, if you listen closely enough, carry the echo of an entire forgotten science, one we did not so much lose as we chose to ignore. And perhaps, if we remember how to listen, we will find that these old prophecies still live among us, singing their quiet truths through the marshes and fields, etched in ice and bark, humming in the hollow spaces between the raindrops and the ringing of a distant bell. It is there that the lost knowledge waits, patient as the frost, sharp as the winter wind, whispering that the earth has always known more than we do, and always will.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next one.